And good morning again. The retired Air Force General Michael Hayden, who served as both the CIA and NSA director, he now consults for the Chertoff Group here in Washington, joins us as our lead guest this morning. Well, General, the president made that news conference on Friday, and he said the American people need to know more about what the National Security Agency is doing, because there are a growing number of people in the Congress who are wondering, is the NSA infringing on Americans' right to privacy? What do you think? You ran the place. What do you think is the most significant thing that the president said?
Well, it was a very interesting speech, and a speech in front of a press conference. To me, the most telling thing he said was perhaps something he didn't quite say. He didn't suggest he was going to operationally change this program. I mean, there's no suggestion that what he was doing and what President Bush was doing before him with regard to these programs was anything other than lawful, effective, and appropriate. And so that's, I think, the first thing. He also suggested, and I think this was heartening for people with backgrounds like me, and particularly folks who are still doing this kind of work, he also suggested that the oversight regime for this was already quite good. He pointed out there have been no abuses under him or under his predecessor. But he does have this issue of confidence, this issue of transparency. And so the president is trying to take some steps to make the American people more comfortable about what it is we're doing. That's going to be hard because, frankly, Bob, some steps to make Americans more comfortable will actually make Americans less safe.
Well, you know, some of the privacy advocates, when they hear you say, well, the good news is what he didn't say, he's not going to change anything, that might cause them to be a little uneasy.
Well, no, and if you look at the commentary on this, folks from the so-called left are a bit uneasy. They don't want a little more transparency with regard to the metadata program. They want the program stopped. I don't think it will be.
Let me ask you a little about one of the things he proposed for the FISA court. This is the court that meets in secret, and any time NSA comes across something, they think we need to go in and listen in, because they don't listen in just because they get a tip or something. Right. They have to go to this court to get permission to listen in.
If the target is an American person.
If it's an American person. Now, one of the things that the president's talking about doing is adding a kind of a privacy advocate onto the court. This would be someone that when the government comes in and says we need to go in and wiretap this person, we need to eavesdrop, this person would say, wait a minute here, that's going too far. You really don't have a reason to do that. Is that workable?
You know, the president was, I think, quite artful with that portion of his commentary. He didn't quite say what you said. There are two kinds of decisions that the court makes. One is getting a warrant on an individual person. The other, these broad questions of lawfulness about broad programs. I think the president was talking about that and was not talking about getting a public defender in there for Tony Soprano every time you want to go up on a wiretap with him. Now, the question becomes, is that more narrowly defined? That privacy advocate, is that a good or a bad idea? It may be useful for transparency, Bob. It may be useful for confidence. But let me tell you, all right, looking through your windscreen when you lay this on, it just looks like more thorough oversight. Okay? When you're looking in your rearview mirror after the next successful attack, this runs the danger of looking like bureaucratic layering. And so you need to be careful about how many processes you put in there, even though I freely admit you don't get to do this at all unless the American people feel comfortable about it.
Well, let me just cite an example. Let's say that the NSA runs across something that they think an attack on the country is imminent, and they want to go into the court and say, we got to do this right now. Right. Is it feasible? Is it practical? Is it even possible to say, well, wait, let's argue this a bit? I mean, it would seem to me that time was of the essence.
No, it's very much of the essence. Now, again, if it's just going up on a specific number, I think that can happen rather quickly. And frankly, I don't think the president's arguing for an advocate there. But if now you find yourself in a period of increased danger, let me make something up, Bob. This is no one's proposal, all right? But you've got this metadata here. It's now queried under very, very narrow circumstances. If the nation suffers an attack, there are other things you could do with that metadata. There are other tools. So in that kind of an emergency, perhaps you would go to the court and say, in addition to these very limited queries we're now allowed to do, we actually want to launch some complex algorithms against it. That's the kind of argument that, frankly, even I could accept. You might want to have an advocate there.
Do you think, General, that the public understands what it is the NSA is doing? They have this large collection of phone numbers, but if I understand it, they're not listening in on people's conversations. No. They don't do that until they do get a court order.
That's correct. To an American, to target an American. Actually, the president was quite candid in his commentary. He actually pointed out that when he was Senator Obama and wasn't quite fully knowledgeable about these programs, he was opposed to them. And only becoming President Obama, when he actually saw what was going on, did he become actually a very forceful advocate for them.
Do you think the president was asked, says, now that you're saying we need to shine some more light on this, now we need more transparency, he said, he was asked, does this mean now that Edward Snowden was a whistleblower? Do you have a different idea? And he said, well, he's not a patriot. Yeah. What do you think of Edward Snowden? Did he do us all a service here by bringing this forward?
I've offered two comments, and I've actually thought about this. And clearly the debate was coming. He accelerated it. He didn't inform it. He made it more emotional. And so, you know, there's some real downsides to what he's done. I'll give you an example. You and I witnessed Katrina, right? I can tell you right now, Bob, the levees around Lake Pontchartrain are the strongest they've been in a century. But Katrina was still a bad thing. And that's how I view Mr. Snowden. And with regard to how to categorize him, we used to have a word for somebody who stole our secrets, who got the job to steal our secrets, and then he moved with those secrets to a foreign country and made those secrets public. It wasn't whistleblower, it was defector. And I actually think that's a very good word for him.
Do you think he's a traitor? Would you go that far?
Traitor is narrowly defined in the Constitution. I'll stick with defector.
Some of the people quoted in the Washington Post today suggest some of the classified briefings that the NSA has given to members of Congress were at best inadequate, that they felt like they were having to play 20 questions, that if they couldn't think of the right question, they weren't going to get the answer that they deserved. Has the agency been candid with members of Congress whose job is to hold oversight on them?
The agency's been tremendously candid. And let me apologize to members of Congress that this is just a complicated subject, all right? And it's just hard to understand. Bob, I used to do this briefing under President Bush's terrorist surveillance program. We would huddle up about once a quarter before we briefed congressional leadership. My guidance to my people at Fort Meade was, I want to be full Monty here. I don't want anyone to be able to say, when this becomes public, and we knew it would be, well, I got some sort of briefing. I wanted them to know exactly what we were doing and the scale on which we were working. And by the way, every member of Congress was invited to read a letter in 2009 and in 2011 that specifically said, we are gathering the metadata on all calls in the United States.
Do you think the Congress should be criticized? Do you think they've not been doing their job? Not because it's a fault of NSA, but...
Look, this is really hard. It is really complicated. You don't need ill will on either side to make it difficult to communicate on subjects as obscure and as technically vibrant as signals intelligence is. But it really does require a great deal of work. And Chairman Rogers, the chairman of the House Intel Committee, had a great phrase in some recent commentary. He said, hey, look, if you don't have time to be a member of the Intelligence Committee and dedicate your time to it, then you shouldn't be a member of the committee.
Some people say the president was just being peremptory here, that the Congress was getting ready to take away some of the ability that the NSA has to do some of the things it does. What if they did do that?
Yeah. You're referring to the vote, only a 12-vote margin a couple of weeks back. Bob, that wasn't regular order. That wasn't thoughtful procedure. Let me be a little critical here, all right? That looked a lot like mob action. I mean, people acting out of emotion, with a false sense of urgency, and with a great deal of misinformation.
But would the national security be damaged if that happened?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, General, it's always good to have you, and thank you for being with us this morning.